Hi, everybody. I'm so excited you could join us for our final day of the Tools for Perseverance with the theme of hope. So, we've been talking about hope all week and about Snyder's hope theory, which gives us tools to help us build hope. And hope, according to this theoretical model, is a skill that we can build over time. And we've talked about, oh, goodness gracious, this Cisco WebEx thing is going to drive me insane. We talked a lot about how hope can be built over time and specifically about how we can use the 4 steps of hope. So, our first step was have goals, a second step was open your mind to different pathways. And then we talked about planning your success, creating a realistic picture of what success looks like, and then planning for all of the barriers that might come forward. And then finally, we get to talk about our last step, which is enjoy the journey. So let's get started. We're starting every day this week with a different quote about hope, and this one comes from Anne Frank. She says, even during her time of captivity, she wrote this: in spite of everything, I still believe that people are really good at heart. And if you remember, Anne Frank and her family were stuck in a very small space for a very long time. And I thought it was very pertinent to hear her say that in spite of everything, she believed that people were really good at heart. So let's talk about gold stars and trophies. There's some negative connotation built around the idea of rewarding small behaviors, right? Specifically around a generation of children that grew up getting a gold star for everything that they did. In 1965, if a group of kids were playing soccer and one team won and the other team lost, only one team, the winning team, would get a trophy. But in 1995, there were trophies given for participation. And there was a shift in our culture that was done by the parents of the children at that time that created this idea of giving gold stars. And so there was culturally the idea of gold stars and giving rewards has been very quickly associated with the difference between Gen X, the baby boomers, and then the millennial generation. Not to mention Gen Z, or what is being called Gen Edge, which is between the year 2000 and the year 2020. So those individuals are just getting the hitting the workforce. But this is not a generational concept. Giving gold stars, giving yourself rewards, is nothing to do with a generational concept. In fact, this is a very primitive part of our brains that gives a specific kind of reward. So key point to this is tracking. So let's talk about what this does to your brain. Operant conditioning, which is part of what we understood about, I think we mentioned it last week. We talked about Pavlov's dogs and how they were given food and Pavlov rang a bell. And over time, he would ring the bell and the dogs would drool because they associated those two things together. And then, Skinner in the 30s and 40s did a lot of research on this idea of operant conditioning and trained pigeons to do all kinds of things. It's a primitive part of our brain that enables us to form these types of habits. If y'all came to my class on habit formation, we talked about using a clicker to help surgeons train faster. There's surgical programs around the country that are helping train surgical residents and fellows by using either an audible clicker that goes click, click, or that's a really technical term there, or using a flashlight that flashes across their screen to give their brains that burst of dopamine, that burst of reward drug. So here's the deal. We've talked about creating these goals. We've talked about why we're going to plan for all these barriers that might come up, and we've got all these backup plans about how to create different pathways. But the trick to keeping this going is through rewards, intermittent rewards throughout our system. So when we start off on this journey, our brains are going to have this burst of dopamine. We're going to be super motivated to do it. It's like when you first decide you're going to go to the gym, you've got brand new shoes and you've got a new gym clothes and you've got a new gym bag and you go to the gym for the first week. And then the second week it gets harder, right? Because you get a diminishing reward. I like to call this the lasagna effect. If you're really hungry and you're baking a lasagna and you get a slice of the lasagna out, and the very first, my mouth is watering thinking about it. I'm clearly hungry. But the very first bite is so tasty, right? It's so delicious. Your anticipation of it is so delicious. You're getting this huge burst of reward in your head, in your brain when you eat that first bite. But after a while, if you keep eating the lasagna, your brain is going to turn on the stop button, right? It's going to hit the stop button so that you feel satiated, so that you don't continue eating so much that you become sick, right? You're going to have a stop button that turns off so that if you keep eating by the 45th bite of lasagna, you're going to feel sick, right? If you kept eating, it would feel sick. In the same way, when we're trying to achieve our goals, if we're going after our goals, the first couple of times that we're doing the new thing, our brains are going to give us this burst of reward, but it's a diminishing return so that over time we get less and less. And in order to keep going, in order to make it past that stop button, essentially, that our brains are going to hit, we have to give ourselves new rewards. We have to put something out there that gives ourselves that reward. And so here's the thing. Tracking is key. You can't reward yourself for things that you don't know are happening. So every time I do squats or do little planking or other exercises in my small office space, I give myself a little tally mark on a whiteboard that I have in this space. And that is the level of reward that you need to be giving yourself. If you are taking a step towards your goal, if you're doing something, any behavior that moves you closer to that goal, give yourself a tally mark. The other thing I have is I have a set of stones in my office, right? And at the beginning of the day, I move a stone for every time I do something that I need to get done. And just that little action of moving, a pile of stones, little pebbles from one jar to another is enough to give my brain a burst of dopamine to give me motivation to keep me going, right? So importantly, time in the middle of chaos is merging and morphing. I don't know if y'all feel this, but the days start to blend together. There's a lot of overlap of what our days look like as we don't move around as much. And time is going to get really confusing. So tracking is even more key during this time of chaos than it is in other times. Having a routine, having a schedule that you're following, and then tracking your progress are really key to emotional health. Everything that I'm reading about successful surviving, I'm reading about people who live in Antarctica, I'm reading on people who are stuck in submarines, or people who go to space, right? They get stuck in these small spaces, and one of the things that makes them keep their mental and behavioral health in good shape is this idea of having a routine and then tracking progress to keep that emotional health, right? Time, again, is something that merges and morphs throughout your days during this thing. So consider what small rewards can you give yourself? Not necessarily giving yourself a trophy, but what are some of the small things you can do? Is it moving a pebble from one jar to another? Is it getting a hash mark on a piece of paper over a period of hours during the day? Consider giving yourself small rewards, right? And that is the last of our steps, right? Have goals, hone those goals, open your mind to different pathways, plan your success, realistic picture of what success looks like, and then also specifically plan for those barriers, plan for what obstacles you're going to encounter. And then finally, enjoying the journey, making sure that you are rewarding yourself, making sure you're giving your brain that burst of dopamine all along the way so you can continue this for the long term. Your last bit of homework for this session is asking yourself, how will you track your journey? What are you going to do to record your progress, right? What journaling technique do you use, right? And then how are you going to regard your progress? And I think instead of regard, I meant reward. How are you going to regard and reward your progress, right? How are you going to make sure that you are giving yourself the gold stars? One of the best ways, we talked about social support last week. If you can share your progress with someone else and get them to celebrate with you, it's a huge burst of both oxytocin, which is the bonding hormone, and also the dopamine that gives us that feeling of reward. So those are the last steps. I hope you employ them. It is such a wonderful thing to have psychology, to have science tell us how we can be building hope during this very chaotic time. It's been my pleasure to talk with you about this subject, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say.